Welcome to The Sideshow.
Okay, welcome to another edition of The Sideshow. Today, Mike is going to be launching us into conversation. Why don't you let our listeners know what we're going to be talking about today, Mike?
All right, thanks, Mark. Today, I want to talk. We're going to talk about one of my favorite albums from back in the day, and certainly one of my favorite album sides, and that is the Talking or not the Talking Heads, "Remain in Light" side two.
Awesome.
Talking Heads were really one of the bigger and better American bands of the late 70s and early 1980s. And I believe, and a lot of music critics believe, that their sort of musical artistic high point was the album "Remain in Light." The subsequent album, "Speaking in Tongues," was their most commercially successful album, and I think
Yeah.
that's when they really kind of hit their peak. And they had a concert movie that came out that was recorded when they were on the tour for that album, and that's when they got really big. But they had started to kind of slowly building during the late 70s. "Remain in Light" was released in the fall of 1980, and it was their fourth album, and they'd released four albums in 4 years. Their first album came out in 1977, was called Talking Head 77. Then in the next year, 78, was more songs about buildings and food was the title of the album. That had a cover of Al Green's "Take Me to the River," which got some airplay on the radio. In 1979, they released an album called "Fear of Music," which sort of their style had continued to grow or to expand and evolve. Uh, uh, and then their fourth album in 1980 was "Remain in Light," which we're going to talk about. And just kind of a brief history of the band. The sort of leader of the band, the primary singer and songwriter, named David Byrne, and the drummer, whose name is Chris Franz, were students at the Rhode Island School of Design in the early 70s. And they started a band together, which was called the Artistics. And apparently, some of the people around the Rhode Island School of Design that heard them perform referred to them kind of behind the scenes as the Autistics, which so I don't know what kind of material they were putting out at that time, but that I read that somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, as they moved on, they moved to New York City together, or at least at the same time. And Chris Franz was married to a woman named Tina Weymouth, who eventually became the bass player. And they performed in New York City. They performed at a club where a lot of bands in the New York sort of punk new wave scene played, called CBGB's. The Ramones would play there. There was a New York band called Television, Patti Smith. Kind of like the people that formed Blondie
Mm-hmm.
would hang out there. It was that kind of scene, so to speak. And that's where they kind of drew some attention. And then as they were starting to kind of move towards their first record deal, they ended up adding a member, the fourth and final member, Jerry Harrison, who had been in a band in the Boston area called the Modern Lovers earlier in the 70s. And they were kind of one of those kind of a pre-punk, pre-new wave sort of bands. They played in the early 70s. Had been very influenced by like the Velvet Underground. The leader of that band was a guy named Jonathan Richman. And so Jerry Harrison had kind of made his bones in the music industry previously, and was actually like going to school at Harvard or something like that for whatever. And he somehow caught wind of what these guys were doing down in New York, and there was some communication back and forth. And after they had secured a record deal, and actually had started to record material for their first album, he became a member. Their first album was kind of jangly pop music with sort of an odd bent to it. Psycho Killer is probably the best known song from their first album. And as they evolved, they started to get more of an electric feel to their music. I mean, they always played electric guitars, but this was it sort of evolved. And part of the reason for that is their second album, along with their third and fourth album, which we're going to talk about today, were all produced in part by Brian Eno, who's an Englishman who people may not have heard of him, but he's been involved in some fairly high-powered music as a producer. I think most notably the band U2.
Yeah.
Unforgettable Fire, Joshua Tree, Achtung Baby. Some of when U2 first got really big, Brian Eno was produced with them. One of the producers, along with another man named Daniel Lanois. But in any case, Eno came in and was working with Talking Heads for their second, third, and fourth albums. And for anyone who's familiar with Eno, you can hear his influence. You can hear his background vocals very clearly on Remain in Light. And so he certainly was a catalyst in their sort of slowly expanding style. The album Fear of Music was much more electric, a little darker in tone than their second album. That had songs Life During Wartime, Memories Can't Wait, and some other songs that were, I don't know if it's like they were played in a minor key, but there's just a little darker sort of tone to the music. And some of these albums had been recorded in New York City. They did some recording at a studio in the Bahamas called Compass Point, where a lot of music is recorded. So they've been doing some interesting things. And by the time of Remain in Light, they were focused on African rhythms, not unlike, but different from what Peter Gabriel started doing around the same time. And their songs weren't so much developed by coming up with chord changes and stuff like that. They were developed more on the percussion tracks. Very African percussion, African rhythms were a big part of what they were looking to do come time of Remain in Light. And
well, you get a lot of that. This influence of Brian Eno, I think, is really significant here, because on the one hand, I mean, there's some Brian Eno music you can listen to, and your first notion is that's pretty weird. But I think what it's really about, especially working with a band like this, is that idea of trying to expand what they're considering playing, and how they want to play it, and how they want to put it down as an album. And when they find something like these African, pseudo rhythms and polyrhythms, I think that they refer to them as, it's like, yeah, this is something really neat that goes with, that goes with kind of the direction that we were looking for anyway. And I think someone like Eno helps them find those different things and then bring them into their music. And I think it certainly was an impact here, because you did see kind of a darker, kind of a different shade of the albums as they were going on. And I'd also agree, though, that it came to a head from a performance or talent perspective in Remain in the Light. I think that the band would look at that as what they would consider like, yeah, that was where we really made a mark as an album of good music. And to your point, the next album might have been commercially more successful, but I think that they would look at Remain in the Light and say, this is when we arrived as a band.
And it's Remain in Light,
Remain in
not
light. Excuse
not
me.
in the light.
Yes.
Well, and Brian Eno is a very interesting character, and he's put out a lot of very interesting music as Brian Eno. He was one of the original members of the English band Roxy Music. And then, a lot of his other work has been as a producer, and he does play instruments. He's not. I don't think he is a conventional musician.
Yeah.
He is more of sort of like a musical architect, and he's someone who kind of takes sound and does things with it, and figured out different ways to accomplish the creation of different sounds and musical sounds,
Hmm.
and putting them together, and shape and texture is added to the music when he kind of gets a hold of it and does stuff. Um,
Absolutely. And it kind of shows this intersection of how important it is for a band, regardless of their level of talent. They can sit in their garage and play great music and have great songs, but we see so many times talking about all these albums as we do, where a band really begins to hit their stride when they're matched with the right producer. Not only a producer that's skilled, and Brian Eno is, you cannot argue that he is not a skilled producer just based on the sheer volume of records that have been sold that he produced, but the right matchup with the band as well, and where the band was looking to go, and that is just such a critical element of success that we have seen time and time again, where bands were moving, they were making their mark, but until they came in contact with that producer that they were talented and they were really able to groove with, that's when things really started to create traction. And it's certainly the case here.
when the and this was kind of this was not kind of, it was the third album
Hmm.
that was produced with this partnership between Talking Heads and Brian Eno, and they'd had an opportunity to kind of hit their stride, as you
Yeah.
say, so to speak. And one of the things, just because I don't want to get too into the weeds as far as what the details of that process were. I mean, because people can listen to the music and kind of figure out for themselves. But one thing I read somewhere was that a lot of the songs kind of took shape. Not all of them, but a number of the songs took shape by the band just jamming and then taking bits and pieces here and there that came out of it, and then putting them together later into a sort of a song later, and then having that be sort of the basis of the song, and then adding on top of that. And somewhere in the background, David Byrne was coming up with lyrics to all these things.
Yeah.
Um, Not an easy lyricist to always figure out what in the heck he's talking about or trying to get at. I mean, there's the big ideas you can spot, but getting down into the nuts and bolts of what he's trying to say is kind of difficult. In any case, Remain in Light was released in, I believe, is October of 1980, and I've got the album here. The front cover is a picture of the four band members. The letter A in the title of the band, those letters are inverted, gives it sort of just an odd, off kilter look. And at the time in 1980, that was a relatively innovative use of computer technology for graphics.
Hmm.
At that time, it looks pretty simple now. The back cover has another shot of some military airplanes,
Hmm.
and why there was no gatefold to the album. Why they had the military airplanes? There is, I guess, one of the songs on the side that might have some relevance to that. But in any event, that's the album cover. And starting out with side two, the first song is called "Once in a Lifetime." It's probably the most known song on the album, and I assume that a lot of listeners may have heard it.
Hmm.
But why don't we just play a little bit from the beginning of that song before we dig in?
Okay.
You may find yourself living in a shotgun shack, and you may find yourself in another part of the world, and you may find yourself behind the wheel of a large automobile, and you may find yourself in a beautiful house with a beautiful wife, and you may ask yourself, well, how did I get here? Letting the days go by, let the water hold me down. Letting the days go by, water flowing underground into the blue again. After the money's gone, once in a lifetime, water flowing underground. And you may ask yourself, how do I work this? And you may ask yourself, where is that large automobile?
All right. Pretty straightforward. The first verse is kind of one of the more well-known slabs of lyrics from David Byrne with "How did I get here?" And then it goes into the chorus, the "letting the days go by," and kind of nice guitar chorus sound and everything like that. And the song is as you go through the rest of the lyrics, and I don't want to pick them apart, but I think it's a song about going through life and floating rather than swimming,
Yeah.
and just kind of letting the flow of life sort of take you where it's going to take you, and obviously the water is a big piece of imagery in the lyrics. The water flowing underground is a big one. And so, I mean,
Yeah.
on the one hand, it's not that difficult. It's like, okay, you've got water flows through life. Water is the force of life. And if you float along with it, it's going to take you places, and you may marvel at where that is.
And or marvel or wonder again how you got here. If you listen to the vocals, I mean that line, how did I get here? And looking around and almost confused about where they are. It's kind of like if you stop thinking about where your life is going, you run the risk of waking up and really having no idea of where you are. It's like, is this my beautiful wife and this my beautiful house? I mean, how did I get here? It's certainly a message of like mindfulness and living in the present, and at the same time, kind of being active in where you want to go, as opposed to letting life float you down. The lyrics do a great job of layering on top of the music and creating this kind of hecticness of these realizations on where the person is. But real quick though, I'd like to step back and point that something started to happen in music right around the time that this album came out. That we talk a lot about albums from the 70s, that good music, and this is music that kind of is on the tail end of that. But music videos started to become important right around the time that this album came out. And Talking Heads were kind of active and creative in the music video process. In fact, some of their music videos received more awards than the music did it itself. And I don't think it's a stretch to say that music videos had a way of changing music. And this was just kind of right at the beginning of when that was happening. Because you can go on YouTube and you can find the music videos from some of these songs. And Talking Heads did had some very acclaimed music video. But I just wanted to not necessarily talk about the videos for this song, but music started to change because of music videos. And this was kind of right at the beginning of that process.
Well, and I don't believe MTV went on air until 1981.
Yep.
And there was an official music video created by Talking Heads for this song, Once in a Lifetime. And there is another music video that was created by Talking Heads for Cross-Eyed and Painless, which is on side one of
Yes.
Remain in Light, and we're talking about side two today. But I mean, Cross-Eyed and Painless, in my opinion, is the most enduring track off the album, and the video for that is very it's different than the video. David Byrne is sort of in the video for Once in a Lifetime, but none of the band members appear in the. It's sort of a very hip hop. There's some really interesting dancing and stuff like that in the Cross-Eyed and Painless video, and that's an excellent point. I mean, they really were sort of taking a look at how can we present visual imagery to go along with this music in both a narrative sense and just a vibe sense. What sort of images does a song bring about, regardless of whatever the specific lyrics are talking about. So that's a good point. I mean, they did sort of straddle that era of post MTV.
Yep.
That's a good point. And the one of the lyrics that gets repeated in Once in a Lifetime is "Same as it ever was,
Yes.
same as it ever was, same as it ever was." And then it gets back to the water dissolving and water removing. There is water at the bottom of the ocean. Under the water, carry the water. He's talking about water.
Yeah, yes,
And-
clearly an aquatic theme.
I mean, I guess I don't know if I would use that. I mean, you don't necessarily. I mean, there's water at the bottom of the ocean. You think about the bottom of the ocean, but this is something. There's the water dissolving and water removing. There's something a little more elemental than that. I not to pick nits with you, but and then just the chorus repeats twice at the towards the end of the song, but it's just you could, from the clip you can hear. I mean, it's got a very straightforward beat to it. It's not a loud guitar song, but it's definitely got good guitar at points in the song, and it just sort of takes you along and flows, not unlike the water that it's singing about.
It's also got a line that they use that I really like. It's a theme I really enjoy, not just in this song, but whatever. But it's the line, "Into the blue again, after the money's gone." And that notion of in life, kind of, you can be thoughtless and flowing along because the money's there, the money's flowing. And suddenly, whoa, the money's gone, right? The lottery winnings ran out. This week's paycheck is now gone, right? That feeling of realizing that, well, I didn't have to worry about money, and now that I do, is an interesting notion that they bring up in this song.
Well, and if you hadn't have brought that up, I would have brought up that exact line, because that is one thing that kind of comes in here. Here's the guy, it's beautiful car, beautiful house, beautiful wife. How did I get here? It's like, well, how permanent is it?
Yeah.
If you don't know where you come from, and you don't know where you're going, you don't know where you are. And after the money's gone, it kind of like the Beatles lyric, out of college, money spent, see no future, pay no rent, all the money's gone, nowhere to go. So that is an excellent point, and one that I've taken note of.
What you just talked about that idea of, well, is it that we don't know where we are, or we don't know how we got here, or we don't know where we're going, kind of like we don't even understand what the problem is? We're going to kind of revisit that theme in a couple songs, right? We'll be talking about something else, but I'll bring that back up again as we get a couple songs in, as we're later on in the side, a theme that they clearly focus on.
Yeah. All right. In any case, once in a lifetime, one of the a big one of their bigger, or let's say one of their more well-known songs.
Yeah.
The second song on the side is called "Houses in Motion," and this song is a little different. It has a darker vibe to it. And it starts out with one of the kind of what I would call a typical David Byrne lyric. And at the very beginning, the opening lyrics start, for a long time I felt without style or grace, wearing shoes with no socks in cold weather. I knew my heart was in the right place. I knew I'd be able to do these things. And that's I think of that, and I think that's typical David Byrne
Yeah.
stuff. This song I think is also it's in some ways it's kind of the inverse of the previous song, Once in a Lifetime, where someone just is sort of floating through life. Here I think the focus is on someone who may be paying too much attention to what they're doing and where they're trying to go. I'm living in, eventually, the lyrics go to, I'm visiting houses in motion. Two different houses surround you in the last verse. And I think that this song is about someone who is so keyed in to what they're doing that they basically are surrounded by two houses, one of which is what they want to be doing or where they want to be going, and the other house is the way it actually is.
Mm-hmm.
And
I'd agree that there is this kind of a duality that it talks about. It's almost like there's concern for some of these superficial things, that the constant notion of striving for that makes you kind of robotic almost, and you end up kind of robotically moving through life thinking you're on the path. I'm supposed to wear shoes with no socks because that's the cool thing, right? But you're losing track of where you really wanted to go. And just by the way, I'm just going to interject. There was a certain point in my life where I realized that actually was a thing that people did. It's like they went and I wear shoes with no socks. I was never into it. I want to get on the record right now. The notion of walking around all the time wearing shoes with no socks drives me freaking nuts. Let me just get that out there right now. No commentary on the song. I'm more talking about the habits of people walking down the street. Grosses me out. Anyway, back to the song.
Well, and I mean, there's certainly in the next track, there's things about doing things because you think that's what is going to look better to other people.
Yep.
And what am I doing? One of the things that happened around the time of this album was when the band was performing live and also in the studio. They had additional musicians that would play with them.
Yeah.
And there were a number of different musicians that were that played on this album. Probably one of the better known is guitarist Adrian Belew, who had played with Frank Zappa, David Bowie. He went on to be a member of one of the incarnations of King Crimson after this album was recorded. And another musician who was not as well known, who Brian Eno had played with, named John Hassel, who played trumpet and other brass instruments. And there's a very he plays on this song, and maybe this would be a good time to have a little clip from Houses in Motion.
Never get to talk. Tell us a little bit, but not too much. Right about then, it's where she give up. She has closed her eyes. She has give up hope.
All right, and you could hear at the end of that clip that that's a trumpet. That's
Yeah.
that instrument that's playing the solo there is a trumpet. It's a very unique way of recording a trumpet, and it kind of fits in with its sort of otherworldly aspect of the song. And you know, kind of you mentioned, before the clip that there's just more of a mechanized sound to this,
Hmm.
and sort of the machinery of life,
Industrial almost.
almost,
Almost.
almost, and that trumpet solo, it just has a much more otherworldly sound than a guitar could provide. And Adrian
Hmm.
Belew could get you he could create some weird sounds from his guitar. But
So they were
this is
intentional on using the trumpet.
yeah,
They wanted that sound.
it just had an otherworldliness to it, and it's I'm walking a line. I hate to be dreaming in motion. I'm walking a line just barely enough to be living. It's sort of like he's just getting by. He's working hard. The singer is working hard, but isn't really getting anywhere in his mind. And get out of the way. No time to begin. This isn't the time. So nothing was done. Not talking about, not many at all. I'm turning around. No trouble at all. I'm keeping my fingers behind me. I'm walking a line, divide and dissolve. It's like, what the fuck am I doing? And why?
Yeah.
What am I gaining out of all of this?
Hmm.
I think it's a song about someone who's putting more thought into their life and is not as happy as the person in the previous song who was kind of allowing themselves to flow with the current,
Yeah. Yeah.
so to speak. Now, I don't think there's any intentional message between
Yeah.
combining those two songs, because I think that the songs are a little more nuanced than
Hmm.
I'm able to get at, but very different. A very
Yeah.
different song than the first song, but
Hmm.
both of them have kind of a beat to it, and this one more so than Once in a Lifetime, this sort of African percussion
Yes.
influence.
Yes.
And so I mean, two incredibly strong opening tracks,
Hmm.
and are among the best songs that Talking Heads ever came up with, in my opinion.
Hmm.
Um, so in any case, the third track is a very unique, very interesting piece of music, and it's got a relatively repetitive uh, musical track in the background, and then basically spoken lyrics
Yes. Yeah.
by
It's a like a vocal story as opposed to more of a lyrical
yeah.
sound.
They aren't they. It's prose.
Yeah.
You've got poetry, you've got song lyrics, and then you've got just prose. And this is it's spoken prose to musical accompaniment, but it's not.
Hmm.
I mean, it's not rap. It's just
Yeah.
even though I mean, most people equate rap with talking, it really isn't.
Yeah.
It may not be singing, but it's not just kind of clear speaking. So musical accompaniment with spoken narrative, and I mean, this is clearly a song about people who are overly concerned with their physical appearance.
Hmm.
And it starts out, he would see faces in movies, on TV, in magazines, and in books.
Yeah.
And so you've got someone and he thought that some of these faces might be right for him.
Hmm.
And so, the song, he continues to describe that he thought that if he could keep the image of the perfect face in his mind or somewhere in the back of his mind that over time he could cause his appearance to change.
Mm-hmm.
And that gradually his face would change its shape. And, that's kind of an interesting concept. But he goes on to talk, in the second verse, he goes on to talk, and maybe we could play a clip of that at this point just to kind of get that out.
Sounds good. Let's do that.
He imagined that this was an ability he shared with most other people. They had also molded their faces according to some ideal. Maybe they imagined a new face would better suit their personality. Or maybe they imagined that their personality would be forced to change to fit the new appearance. This is why first impressions are often correct. Although some people might have made mistakes, they may have arrived at an appearance that bears no relationship to them. They may have picked an ideal appearance based on some childish whim or momentary impulse. Some may have gotten halfway there.
All right. So obviously you could hear the musical accompaniment on that clip, which stays relatively consistent throughout the track. And the opening line of that segment of the story is he imagined that this was an ability he shared with most other people.
Mm-hmm.
So there, it's not this guy is not just thinking this is something that he can do. He's like, this is something that everyone does or most people do. And the line that kind of throws this into the what in the heck is he talking about realm with David Byrne is, this is why first impressions are often correct.
Mm-hmm.
I can't figure out how that fits in to the rest.
Well, I think he's talking then that you he starts to get that, like, there gets to be a little out of sync in how you want to look and how you act, and how, if this is really the way that I should look, this is the way that I end up acting. And there's people that the way that they act is driven by how they look. So just the way you see someone is, in first impressions, that's probably what they're going to end up being like, no matter what they're trying to act like. This is what I talked about earlier on when I said these themes of, it's hard to even identify what the problem is, because he's saying, look, is it more important to look like you feel? Is it important to act like you look? Is the problem that you don't feel like you act? He's kind of talking, there's all these potential problems that prop up when you're trying to modify your appearance to look like you feel, and then you have to act like you look, and there's all types of potential problems that start to erupt, and you don't necessarily even know which of these is out of sync with what's going on. I think very interesting.
It sounds like you're suggesting that it creates a vicious circle.
Yes, exactly. Exactly.
Well, and right after that line, he kind of goes into really the substance of what he's saying. Although some people might have made mistakes.
Yes.
They may have arrived at an appearance that bears no relationship to them, based on some childish whim or momentary impulse.
Yes.
Some may have gotten halfway there and then changed their minds.
Mm-hmm.
He really gets down to just the superficiality of all this, and that, well, no, you can't just sort of pick and choose who you are on some whimsical basis, especially not based on what are at Ground Zero sort of superficial considerations.
I mean, doesn't this story, the story and what's happening, I mean, doesn't this, you know, seem to come right out of some type of acid trip, or, you know, just intense high, where you start to imagine that these abilities exist, and then what ends up happening? I can see this whole thing sprouting from an out of body experience that they were having. And then the thing is, though, when you bring it back together, it makes sense. I mean, you can see people that's what I want to look like that movie star right there, and that's what I'm going to look like. And maybe that wasn't really what I wanted to look like. And to your point, all the other things, I kind of got halfway there, and then I changed my mind, or I became that person, and that's not what I wanted. It's interesting. It's an interesting concept.
Well, you know, given the stuff I was up to at the time that this album was in its heaviest rotation with me, believe me, I thought that a lot of David Byrne's lyrics were specifically about drug experience.
Yes.
But I don't really believe that that's true. But you know, just given his way of thinking, certainly the stuff he thinks about it's good fodder for you know, sort of brain candy when you're high. But I think it's a little more introspective than that. You know, when like Cross-Eyed and Painless, for example, when lifting my head and walking around inside. You know, he's getting down to something different than that. But certainly the atmospheric quality of the music and some of the just sort of intriguing polyrhythms, you know, that you mentioned before, and just sort of what at the time was a relatively innovative structuring of the songs, and the fact that, you know, at least the first two songs, you could dance to them.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of different ways to come at these songs, different ways to enjoy them. You know, it's stuff that you could play at, like this album, you could play this at a party where it was in the background, or you could just sit down by yourself and listen to it and find it engaging, and other different sort of ways as well. But the and you know, right after he says that, you know, some may have gotten halfway there and then changed their minds, then there's a pause, and you know, after the clip that we listened to is done, the concluding line of the track, he wonders if he too might have made a similar mistake. And that's enough to give one pause.
Yeah.
So a very unique track, at least at the time. You know, you weren't hearing a lot of stuff like that coming out in what was really relatively mainstream music. You know, Talking Heads weren't top 40 music. They weren't, you know, at the tip of popular culture. But in the music industry, it was, you know, Fear of Music, the previous album and this album, both were on, like, you know, best albums of the year lists by music critics and stuff like that. So this wasn't obscure, you know, stuff. It was relatively mainstream.
Oh, I'd agree. And the fact that, and again, this was before MTV, but the success, you start to move to the next album and after that of their videos shows how well it did fit into the mainstream. Even though the music they did not do a radical departure on their music as they got into speaking in tongues or anything like that. It was a continuation. It was different music. But, you know, Talking Heads themselves, I think, had gotten themselves into a groove that a lot of people liked. Again, critically, and just as far as something to listen to and enjoy. They really had kind of hit on something.
Well, the music was sort of hip and fashionable. Music critics liked it. The lyrics were interesting and subject to interpretation, and you could dance to it. I mean, not this song that we just finished talking about.
Yeah.
And Seen and Not Seen. I guess I don't know if I ever said the name of the song. The third track is called Seen and Not Seen. But yeah, no, they did. They just managed to combine a number of different things that coalesced together at the right time, and were just appealing to a lot of people.
Also, we're able to, as far as a brand of a band, not only have enjoyable music, some music that hit the charts and did pretty well in the charts, but they also had a reputation as just a cool band. It's like, oh yeah, Talking Head, cool. A good band. Cool people listened to Talking Heads. Just incredible branding. Whether it was intentional or not, they certainly achieved it.
Well, and I think that when they toured, and I don't know whether it was, they toured between Fear of Music and Remain in Light, and they toured after Remain in Light. But they went on tour with a band that included Adrian Belew, Percy Jones as a bass player, and some of the musicians that went on, and like I think Bernie Worrell, who was one of the keyboard players who performs in the concert movie Stop Making Sense. And I'll tell you, that would have been, I mean, they were a very well-regarded live band.
Yeah.
And, when they first started playing after around the time of their first album, they were kind of a quirky, sort of new wavy band. But by the time that they were touring for Fear of Music and Remain in Light, I mean, they were a unique, very strong international concert band.
Yeah.
They were going out and playing, and they were, within, kind of within the parameters of their audience, they were a well-regarded live act. And if people want to come see you perform live and you're putting out good albums, that's a lot of the best combinations we've talked about in some of the records that we do on the Sideshow are bands that were able to achieve both of those things.
Oh, absolutely. And however, Talking Heads did run into the same issue that a lot of bands do that are able to meet that. They're a touring band and they want to do that, but as the music, the album studio music gets more complex, gets more intricate, we brought in now these kind of African tones and that type of thing. It's harder to do it live.
Yeah.
It's hard to do live with this 4-person lineup that you had done, which is why the touring began to include more people. Then you start to bring in strings and these other things, and it becomes much more difficult to maintain that as the complexity of your studio albums starts to grow. And the Talking Heads did encounter this as we start to get past this point in their. In fact, I believe they after Stop Making Sense, the Speaking in Tongues tour, but that whole kind of popular tour video, they stopped touring.
Yeah.
They continue to produce some albums, but again, it gets hard to give people what they're looking for on the stage.
Well, they were able to build on to, like, by the time of Stop Making Sense, or Speaking in Tongues was their subsequent album, and that album didn't come out until 1983.
Yeah.
So their first 4 albums came out, 1 year apart, and then their 5th album, Speaking in Tongues, it took 3 years.
Yeah.
And the rest did them good because they were still up there, and their live performances were good at that time.
Yeah.
But you're right. After that was basically the high point of the Talking Heads, of Talking Heads. Going back to Remain in Light, moving on to track number 4. And this is one of the more lyrically straightforward songs the Talking Heads that Talking Heads ever put out. It's called, the name of the song is Listening Wind, and it is a slower, sort of mournful song. Definitely maintains sort of the African, sort of third world percussive bass.
Yeah. Kind of an Arabic sound almost to it as well.
There is, and there's a character in the song named Mojik, And I mean, the song is about a third world terrorist.
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty straightforward. If you listen to the lyrics, it's Mojik sees his village from a nearby hill. Mojik thinks of days before Americans came, and this is in 1980 when this album came out. I mean, so this is more than 2 decades before 9/11.
Mm-hmm.
And he's talking about not, there's no concern about, you know, radical Islamic terrorism coming to the United States. That's not what the song is about. The
Yeah.
song is about when, American interests sort of came into a third world country, whether that was because there was oil there or there were mines there or there were, fruit companies or whatever it might be. But here's Mojik is living in his country, and he serves the foreigners in growing numbers, sees them in their fancy houses. And sort of it's the perspective of someone who lives in their own country and didn't necessarily feel like they had any problems, when they were all by themselves, even if it was a relatively primitive lifestyle.
Yeah.
But then when, these Westerners come in, it sort of changes things over. And the guy is singing about the wind in my heart and the dust in my head, the wind in my heart come to drive them away. And maybe we can listen to a track that has some of the lyrics here.
Sure.
And the song.
Let's listen to it.
In his quivering hands, Moshe sends the package to the American man. Softly, he glides along the streets and alleys. Up comes the wind that makes them run for cover. He feels the time is surely now or never more. The wind in my heart, the wind in my heart, dust in my head, dust in my head. The wind in my heart, the wind in my heart, come to drive them away, drive them away.
All right. Well, so that's just, I mean, that's a little taste of what listening wind sounds like. And, and as I say, it's pretty straightforward.
You mentioned that, yes, okay, talking about terrorism 20 years before 9/11. I mean, it's not like terrorism didn't exist. In fact, you're talking 70s, early 80s. This is like Red Army faction, Baader Meinhof group, the Basque terrorists. I mean, there was a lot of terrorism going on in the world. We didn't necessarily, feel it or were as impacted enough, but certainly a relevant song to many people globally.
Well, you mentioned Baader Meinhof. I think when he talks about the wind in my heart, because the wind is kind of like the water in the first song, Once in a Lifetime. The wind is the force here. Now, very different song, very different subject matter, but the wind is the force here. And
Yep.
when you mentioned Baader Meinhof, I think that what the wind is from the perspective of Mojik. The wind is the wrath of God.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And the wind will drive them away. I mean, listening to it, back in the day, I think the wind in my heart and the dust in my head, the wind was going to blow the dust away so you could think clearly.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of, but I don't think that's what the song is
Yeah.
about. I think that it's going to take a little bit more than that to solve the problems that have arisen in Mojik's mind.
Yep.
And it just it's much different than any of the other songs on the album, just in tone, and it's but it's a haunting song.
Yeah.
It really is.
I saw someone describe it as almost a prayer or prayer like song. It is. It's a haunting. I think is a good description of it.
And a little and I believe a lot more straightforward and political than Talking Heads ever was in any other songs.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity in some of these. Not so much in this particular case. You can get a line on what they're talking about pretty quick.
Well, and it's I think that the song is told with some empathy, if not sympathy, for the terrorist. And which certainly became an unpopular position to take post 9/11.
Well, absolutely, and I think though that was back in this time when terrorist incidences were smaller and what was going on, the idea that terrorism was more of a political frustration, the idea that a lot of these groups had an actual beef, the issue that most people had was how they were choosing to address it. And in many cases, these groups had, if there was a legal path for them to take to get things resolved, whether you're talking about in the Palestinians in Munich or these regions that were fighting for independence, or people that were just mad at the West and were doing things. It is, I think it's kind of a shame, not in that we should hold these people up that are doing these things as good people, but I mean, a lot of times there is a reason why these people took action, and if we could address that reason, we might reduce some of the terrorism that comes out with it, and that does take, for even just for one moment, some empathy for the person that's doing it to try to understand. But I'd agree with you 100%. We've kind of lost the ability to see that far back, and we're very focused on the acts themselves. We're focused on the wind more than what was blowing it.
In any case, very, very interesting song, unique song amongst all of Talking Heads material, and but a good song and worthy of this. Which brings us to the final track on the side and the concluding track on the album, called "The Overload," and this song definitely has an industrial feel to it. Very slow, very foreboding, kind of intense. Sort of something's up.
Spooky, scary.
Something with weight is upon us, and it's unclear what it is. And maybe just the first. There's it's the longest song on the side, and the lyrics are made up of 5 4-line stanzas. And why don't we just listen to a track with the first couple, just to kind of give the listeners a taste of the track?
Sure, let's do it.
Terrible signal to even recognize. Gentle
All right. So that is the overload basically, and the I think the most significant lyric in the clip there is a gentle collapsing,
Yeah.
and without getting too English majory on everybody, I think that this song is kind of the inverse of the first stanza in the poem "The Second Coming." And the second stanza in that poem, talks about the rough beast that is coming, and uh, uh, what is this rough beast that slouches towards Bethlehem to be born? Um, but the first stanza of that poem, it basically is describing the world as it existed in the poet's mind at that time. And it's basically like the earth is spinning too fast and people aren't able to hold on, and it's spinning faster. Things fall apart. The center does not hold. Whereas this song, The Overload, I think it's the opposite. It's sort of like it's gravity that is coming, and sort of it is an overload, and people are that a gentle collapsing, and in fact in one of the later verses, the center is missing.
Mm-hmm.
Is one of the lyrics in the song. And so I think of it as sort of trying to describe what's happening in the world. And I think that the overload, what is weighing people down, is just sort of information and stimulation. In one of the earlier tracks, seeing people, movies, TV, magazines, books. Computers were just starting to come in. This was the early use of computers on the album cover graphics. Kind of Aldous Huxley's. You don't need to twist their perceptions. Just give them too much information, and they'll drown in it.
Yeah. And there was the next part of that line of a gentle collapsing in one point of the song spoke of the removal of the insides. And if you can picture that, let's go to today's world where everybody is, this has now been amplified with information and music and now social media and TikToks and little videos and this type of thing. I mean, and you lose the meaning and the connection, the stuff on the inside. When that gets lost, it might be gentle and it might be slow and you might not even notice it, but it's collapsing all the same under the weight of that.
Well, sort of the when the I don't want to get too philosophical here,
Mm-hmm.
but one of the things that I think this song is touching on is the ratio between content and format.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that as life has been going on over the course of the 20th century into the 21st century, it used to be content was the predominant force and format was sort of subservient to the content.
Yeah.
I think that that ratio has changed, and that format is more important than content, and that's the center that's missing.
Yeah.
And just that gentle collapsing. I mean, it's like an old cabin that's in the woods, and as time goes by, and the rot and decay, and it just sort of collapses onto itself, and it's just gravity.
Yeah.
Nobody has to do anything, and the overload is the format collapsing the content.
Mm-hmm.
And which is kind of the movement towards the singularity. Is I think I don't
Yeah.
think that's an I don't think that's an outrageous interpretation of this song.
No, and you don't, the interesting notion about that is you don't have to get to the singularity. In other words, the singularity, if we're going to talk about that as the awakening of computers or networks or whatever, if human existence in society has already collapsed, the singularity won't be that big of a deal.
Well, and I guess I would agree with that, but that gentle collapsing,
Yeah.
it's sort of like a more of a it's not a as the second coming was an explosion. The this song, the overload, is about a submarine that implodes because it gets down too deep in the water and the pressure
Yeah.
crushes it.
Hmm.
Uh, uh, and I don't know. It's. I think that's kind of the bottom line. I think for the overload,
Yeah.
unless you have anything to add.
No, that's it. But again, looking back at the entire side, then how the side progresses from what is, a very kind of upbeat, song, and
The toe tap.
it absolutely, and you kind of progress yourself through, through still jamming as we move into the second song. We really start to though get more of a mood, and we talked about how there's something that is much more gloomy as we get to the fourth song on the side, and now something almost scary and spooky at the end. There's clearly a progression as we work through this entire side, which again makes it a great example of when you look at the entire side as a musical experience, it really works as a single listen. Very intentional as well. If you look at the sides of these albums, the first side was only 16 minutes long, and this side was 23 and some, almost 24 minutes. They could have taken the first song on this side and dropped it on side one, and it would have evened out the sides. Very intentional that these five songs sat on side two.
Well, and I think you're absolutely right about that. The three tracks on side one are all very strong. I think
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Cross-eyed and Painless is the strongest single track on the album,
Eh,
and one of their stronger tracks of their whole career. But side two is a long album sides journey into night.
yes, exactly,
And
exactly.
and that's my story, and I'm sticking to it.
Sounds good. Sounds good. All right. Hey, great album, great side, and great conversation, Mike.
All right, we will talk to you next time.